So now we're going to quickly take a look at anatta. The best way to understand anatta is to understand sakkaya ditthi. There are many ways of explaining anatta, so I'll just use only one of the many different ways. Otherwise, it's going to take a long time. Like I said, this will take about 2 or 3 days. Sakkaya ditthi is coming from this root word sa, kaya, and ditthi. Sa means to take ownership. Kaya means the body. Ditthi means the point of view. Basically, it helps us to, it creates this perspective that there is a self. Personalizing the body and its experience into the notion there is a self. Let's take a look at what the scientists have to say. When we look at an object, right, when we see something, the experience of seeing, it all depends on necessary conditions. Even if the person is not blind and looking at the dog is there, there is one more condition that is necessary in order for the person to see, and that is light. Without light, then the person can't see. So light reflected from the object entering the eyeball, the sense organ. And when it enters the eyeball and strikes the retina, it triggers this panchakanda, the process of perception. When panchakanda arises, then a mental image is formed in the mind. Rupa is produced in the mind. The mind now sees the object. That is really what's going on. And that's the only thing that's going on. And this is what we call experience. That is an experience. Having perceived an object, that is an experience. But what does the mind do? The mind likes to do more to it. The mind is, the mind is like cooking. The mind likes to add salt and pepper, all kinds of stuff to the cooking, and makes it totally different, distorting it. So one of the things it does, it just thinks, oh, there is an object out there. I see the dog out there. Never that these eyes see the dog. I see the dog. So already right at the onset, the I already is created simply from this mental experience. And then the mind projects and says, oh, the dog is out there. But actually what's happening? All that is happening is the experience of seeing. That experience of seeing. But unfortunately, the mind likes to break that experience apart. The process of breaking that experience apart is called dichotomy. Dichotomy means to break something into two distinct parts. And what are the two distinct parts? The subjective part and the objective part. Because the mind perceives that, oh, there is an object out there. So if there is an object out there, then there must be something in here. That's why it breaks that. And that is commonly called another form of dualism. There's two things. Something out there, something in here. So this thing that is in here is subjective. Atta, the self, the me, the I. And then the thing out there is that object out there. But what is really happening? That object, even though there is an object out there, what is happening is we are seeing. And in the process of seeing, there is only the seeing. That's it. There is only the experience of seeing. But because of the way we were brought up and the way the brain has evolved, then, untrained minds will do this, breaking it into two parts. And this is where cultivating the mind helps. When you cultivate meditation to a high level, you begin to truly cultivate and see realities. That process of seeing reality is called vipassana. Right? V means distinct, clear and distinct. That means the real thing that you are seeing. Passana is seeing or observing or being aware. So vipassana means seeing something distinctly. So when you cultivate your mind to that level where you are able to see clearly, vipassana, then you will then attain some real wisdom of what you are perceiving, panya. You begin to know precisely what is it that you have perceived. So meditation is a useful tool to help you to learn how to break away from these conventional things that's going on in your mind. Because of evolution, because of upbringing, because of defilements and so on. So the mind behaves in this way, breaking that experience, dichotomy of experience into subjective self, the atta, and the objective world out there, the loka. That's why we have the world, Loka, and the self, Atta. The world is created by the mind. The mind creates the world. They are objects, of course, but what is really going on? That only thing that is going on in the mind is the experience of the Panchakanda. But then we begin to personalize and cling on to this experience that, oh, I am seeing the dog out there. And that creates that, breaking that experience. So when you look at this image, you are actually seeing many different parts about this image. Right? You're seeing colors. So one part of your brain is processing color. You're also seeing objects like the eye, the nose, the mouth. Another part of your brain is processing individual elements in this image. And then you're also seeing the darkness and the light, right? And different shades. And that gives you the perception of depth. So another part of your brain is processing that. And you are also trying to see each word or each letter. One part of your brain is processing that. And you're also trying to recognize the face. So there are 100 different parts of your brain simultaneously processing this whole image. And this processing then puts together, the mind puts it together with the process of sankara. Sankara is done by the mind. What the brain is doing is just processing all these bits and pieces coming in. So the brain is just processing the sanya vedana pairs. The mind constructs them. That construction process is called sankara. And there are three kinds of sankara. This particular kind of sankara in the Panchakanda is really referring to this chitta sankara, the construction of mental objects. But in this construction, it also refers to memory. This is why it's called chitta sankara. It is affected by memory. Right? The way your mind constructs the image is largely affected by your memory of past experiences. That's why this construction process is normally called chitta sankara. But some people also call it mano sankara. According to my teacher, chitta sankara, mano sankara really means the same thing. It's the mental construction. There are two other kinds of sankara. Right? One is the thought construction, and that is really like asking questions and then answering it. Having a thought and then questioning what it is, having a thought and questioning what it is. That is the process of vitakka vichara. So that produces vachi sankara, thoughts, right? You think of something because there is a question, there is an answer, there is a question, there is an answer constantly going on. Vichara, vitakka, vichara, vitakka, vichara, vitakka, constantly going on. So that is vachi sankara. Then of course there is the breathing process, the respiration process, and that is your bodily activity, and that is the kaya sankara. But here we are dealing basically with this chitta sankara. So 100 different parts of the brain. Let's listen to what this scientist has to say. He's actually a very famous scientist, Dr. Wolf Singer. He is the Director Emeritus of Max Planck Institute for Brain Research. And he, during one of the conferences of the Mind and Life Institute conference, he was explaining his independent research findings to the Dalai Lama. Amazing. Well, he's not a Buddhist, he's a scientist. So he was explaining his scientific discovery, and this is what he has to say.
Areas of the cerebral cortex, about 100 of them, which are interconnected very, very intensively, one with the other. But there is no evidence for a convergence center or for a pyramidal hierarchical organization. These areas, they deal with very different inputs, like from the eye, from the ear, from the touch senses. And then there are areas which belong to the so-called limbic system, which attach emotional connotations to the contents of conscious experience. So there is no single place in the brain where an observer could be located, or a command structure could be implemented, or where the self could have its seat. It's a highly distributed system in which many, many functions occur simultaneously, and there is no coordinator. They self-organize. So there is no coordinator, no observer, no seat of the self.
Notice the last statement, very interesting. So let's take a look at what he said. He pointed out that the brain is highly distributed dynamical system that lacks a single convergence center. That means there is no one part of the brain where all this is coming together. And so there is no coordinator in the brain. There is no observer in the brain. Every part of the brain is working independently, dynamically. The only thing that is really going on is that they are synchronized. And this synchrony is not because of one part of the brain. This synchrony because when different brain region is working, there is a particular oscillation going on. That means the brain vibrates in a certain way. Now this oscillation, the higher the frequency of vibration, the more synchronized your thoughts. The lower the frequency of vibration, the less synchronized your thoughts. So meditation actually helped to raise the level of this vibration, raising the brain waves. These are measured with brain waves. So it's like this 100 different parts of the brain is like an orchestra with 100 different instruments, but there is no conductor. Somehow they all manage to play a piece of music together. That is only when you're awake. When you're not awake, they are not synchronized, so each one will play different things, so your mental image is blurred. So your mental image becomes sharper when they are synchronized. While you are paying attention, then it is sharp. You're not paying attention, it is blur. And the last part is actually the one that is most interesting. It says, this is an independent scientist, and he pointed out they could not find anywhere in the brain where there is indication that there is something called the self, that there is a part in the brain that has this thing called the self. So the scientists basically have proven from their own scientific research that there is no part in the brain that you can point to and say it's a self. So there is no existence of a self. So what is the self? The self is really the mind made, right? So now let's take a look at this thing called self. It is created by the mind. And this creation of the mind is called when self comes to mind. This brain scientist, Antonio Damasio, is another world-class independent brain scientist. And here he's explaining how this self is created.
What is consciousness? What is a conscious mind? Well, first of all, it is a mind which is a flow of mental images. And of course, consider images that can be sensory patterns, visual, such as you're having right now in relation to the stage and me, or auditory images as you're having now in relation to my words. That flow of mental images is mind. But there is something else that we're all experiencing in this room. We are not passive exhibitors of visual or auditory or tactile images. We have selves. We have a me that is automatically present in our minds right now. We own our minds, and we have a sense that it's every one of us that is experiencing this, not the person who is sitting next to you. So in order to have a conscious mind, you have a self within the conscious mind. So a conscious mind is a mind with the self in it. The self introduces a subjective perspective in the mind, and we are only fully conscious when self comes to mind. So what we need to know to even address this mystery is, number one, how minds are put together in the brain, and number two, how selves are constructed. But what about the self? The self is really the elusive problem. And for a long time, people did not even want to touch it, and because they say, how can you have this sort of reference point, this stability that is required to maintain the continuity of selves day after day? And I thought about a solution to this problem is the following. We generate brain maps of the body's interior and use them as the reference for all other maps. So let me tell you just a little bit about how I came to this. I came to this because if you're going to have a reference that we know as self, the me, the I in our own processing, we need to have something that is stable, something that does not deviate much from day to day. Well, it so happens that we have a singular body. We have one body, not two, not three, and so that is a beginning. There is just one reference point, which is the body.
So basically, the scientists have pointed out it is because of this body that is experienced that this self is created, and the purpose of this creation of a self is in search of stability, in search of continuity. So, in other words, the mind creates the notion there is a self, so that there is something stable. Oh, there is a self, then it is some stability. But to say there is no self, it is just experience, then it is all unstable, because experience is unstable. Experience is anicca, it is unstable. So the whole idea is that the mind tries to create a self, to hold on to, to cling on to grasp onto these experiences of Pajjakanda. So that this clinging on creates the notion of a self in order to maintain stability. So what he said is that the mind is a continuous flow of mental images, and here he pointed out a conscious mind is a mind with a self in it. He doesn't say that the self exists. He says that consciousness comes with the notion there is a self. The self introduces this subjective perspective, the I, the me, the my, the I, me, mine. So we are only fully conscious when this self comes to mind. When we begin to have this idea there is a self, then we become conscious. We are conscious of the self, we are conscious of the world. And basically, he pointed out two things we need to know. I have already described the first one, how minds are put together. The second one, how selves are constructed because of the body. We generate brain maps of different parts of the body, and then we use them as reference point and say, this is the self, right? And it's really because of the body. The body and the experience of the body becomes the reference point for the self. I'll just quickly show you this video, how we actually personalize this self. Even a fake arm can be personalized by the mind to be a self.
Jonah's recreating a classic psychology experiment.
The rubber hand illusion is a funny hack of the brain where you can convince people very quickly that this rubber arm is actually their own arm.
He's setting up a stand at Venice Beach, where he'll test volunteers to see if they can experience sensations in a hand that's not theirs.
Welcome to the rubber hand experience. I want you to put your left hand right here and put your right hand right here.
Jonah has participants hide their right hand out of sight behind a divider.
Just gonna drape this so as if it's your real hand.
While he places a rubber hand on the table in front of them.
Just stare at this hand.
Jonah primes participants by brushing both the fake and real hands simultaneously, a process which helps the brain link the feeling to the fake arm.
I feel like you're doing that to my hand, but that's not my hand. My hand's over there, so that's kind of weird.
That's kind of weird.
Now that Jonah has linked this volunteer's brain to the new hand, he's got an even bigger surprise for her.
That was a little bit scary.
Good plan.
Oh my goodness. When you hit that thing, I thought I was gonna lose my hand. So that was so scary. And it really felt like that was like I could move those fingers if I wanted to. My brain decided that I could feel that. Yeah. And that you hitting that was hitting me. That's so strange how it does that.
Impressive, right? Let's see how many other people fall prey to this mind game.
My name's Jonah. Okay, so you keep on staring at that hand.
That was crazy. That was crazy.
Okay.
Oh wow. That scared me.
That scared you?
Although around 10% of the participants weren't able to mentally connect the fake hand to their body.
Did it feel like I smashed your hand at all? No.
Nope.
Most felt some kind of phantom sensation, if not actual pain. Jonah is hacking into these people's mental body maps,
oh my God,
causing them to connect information inaccurately.
Right.
So what's going on is that when he brushed the fake hand and the real hand, they could not see the real hand being brushed. They saw the fake hand being brushed. And feeling the brushing and seeing the brush moving on the fake hand, the mind actually personalized that fake hand to be my hand. But that is just a fake hand. So when that thing hit, they really thought my hand is going to get hit. The same thing with what goes on in your body. The body is nothing but an agent to receive sensory stimulations brought to the brain to be processed, and the mind processes it. And then the mind begins to grasp onto this experience and say, my body, me and mine. That's really how the notion of I, me and mine comes about, and leads to self-centeredness. And therefore we begin to fear this unknown future happenings because of imagination, insecure about these pleasant, unpleasant experiences because of memory, and expecting things to remain unchanged, that because of expectation. This is what I call the imagination, memory, expectation syndrome, the I, me syndrome. But it also corresponds to the notion I and me. Sorry if I'm going to take on a few more minutes, just a few more minutes and we're done. So this is really the personalization process. Sense organs stimulated by environmental activities. Sensation and feeling arise with the stimulations, and emotional concept of a subjective self being affected by these feelings, personalizing the feelings to be the experience of the body. The body becomes a self, and then thinking that it is the self that is experiencing the world. So emotional concept that there is a subjective self being affected by feelings, Vedana. And then seeing that, oh, it is this body that is experiencing it, or thinking is the body that experiences it. But it is not the body that is experiencing, it's the mind that is experiencing it. The body is just an agent to receive stimulations. And therefore, we personalize and cling on to this feeling as the experience of the body. Thinking is the body that is experiencing it, but actually it's the mind, not the body. And therefore, we begin to conceptualize that the body is the self, the atta. And we are experiencing things that are happening around us, the world, the loka. I'll skip that. So basically, my teacher pointed out how this self arises, that the subjective self, the atta, came into being when our reaction, tanha, to sensations led to our personalization, upadana, clinging on to the reaction as mine, and at the same time alienating the world as not mine, the loka. And therefore this subjective experience becomes personalized, and the objective is alienated, and this gives rise to the notion of a self existing in the world. This thing about self existing in the world is existential thinking, which then leads to bhava. And with that, we are reborn over and over again. So in conclusion, sensory experiences are dependent on the presence of necessary conditions which are unstable and unreliable. Anicca, instability. The mind interprets this sense experience by referring to memory, imagination, expectation, and at the same time the mind and body are intertwined, leading to this unconscious emotional reaction which disturbs the mind. And that is really the dukkha, the disturbance going on, the insecurity. And finally, this disturbance leads to personalize one's experience as I and me, giving rise to the notion there is a self that is being affected, and our conscious experience really, there is no self to be affected. All our experiences are impersonal. And this impersonality really is anatta, impersonal. So another explanation of anatta is the impersonality of experiences. Well, experiences are both unstable, insecure, and impersonal, as pointed out in this Dhammapada verse 277 to 279, that all constructions, all sankara are unstable. All constructions, all sankara are insecure, and they lead to experiences, and all experiences are really impersonal. So it is basically anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And the Buddha did point out in the Mangala Sutta that when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, if emotion can be stilled and remain undisturbed, free from grief, cleansed of defilements, and liberated from fear, this is the most supreme bliss. And this is in the Mangala Sutta. And with that, I end my presentation. Okay. Thank you very much for paying attention.